Welcome to Third Culture Leaders, where we dive deep into a world of those who grew up in between cultures. I'm your host, Murali Srinagaranadas, and together we'll explore the unique perspectives of those who grew up in a culture that's different from their parents. While this can be isolating, it also gives us the ability to create deep relationships and gain and embrace a global perspective. This podcast is a platform to share the stories of third culture leaders who have brought a global perspective to Canada. Let's reflect on those insights and take action. I wanted to invite my friend Stephen Harrison, who is the CEO of Tri-County Mennonite Homes, onto the podcast, and he graciously accepted.
I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what my position would be in the world.
Stephen is a leader in the healthcare sector.
My real passion is about how to create an environment or a culture where individuals, whether they're new to Canada, new to the sector, new to the part of the country that they're in, feel comfortable and confident in what they're doing.
And we have a lot of challenges in the healthcare sector. Well, Stephen took a bold step to go out to Kenya and see if he could recruit some people there to come work at TCM Homes. He did that, but more. What does it look like in terms of creating an organization that is a safe environment to receive these newcomers, but also help them succeed in their new role?
It is about creating an environment where inclusion of things like food, music, art. These are things that give people comfort and a reason for feeling like they belong.
I hope you'll enjoy these insights as much as I did. Stephen, it is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's wonderful to be here and having this conversation.
I'm excited to get into a lot of things about how you got to the place where you are today and some of those stories. I'm curious, is there a defining moment or person or event that you can pinpoint that really made you who you are today?
Yes, I think I can probably go down that road. My upbringing, so I was born in Toronto. To a very eclectic family is how I like to describe it. On my mom's side, both of her parents were new immigrants to Canada, my grandfather coming from China, my grandmother coming from Ireland. So, my mom's a first-generation Canadian. Whether she understands what that means or not sometimes is unclear, but she is definitely a first-generation Canadian. On my dad's side, my grandmother comes from French-Canadian, sort of Manitoba side of the world, and my grandfather on that side of the family, we've tracked the lineage of our family all the way back to a slave ship that came off the west coast of Africa out of Nigeria.
Wow.
And so a very diverse population came up through the Underground Railroad, and it actually settled in the Stratford area. So a very complex family dynamic, let's put it that way. And, whenever we would have a family function, there was never a norm, let's put it that way. We had everything from uncles and aunts with afros to curly red-haired, green-eyed individuals in the room and all points in between. I was the only child my parents had, and then not too long into my life in Toronto, my dad got an opportunity to work for CEDA, the International Development Agency down in the Caribbean. And so I was uprooted and moved down to Barbados, which for some people may not sound like a hardship, but I was taken away from that very eclectic family here.
How old were you?
I was about 6, 7 years old when that happened, and I spent the next 8 or 10 years down there. So down to Barbados we went, and I went from being a kid who did not fit into a particular culture here because of that eclectic family. And we lived pigeonholed along Gerrard Street, just between Broadview and what was then the burgeoning and growing Indian community near Coxwell and Gerrard. So we were right in the middle. And so, very complex social dynamics going on in life. And then we moved down to Barbados, and I went from being a kid that didn't have a culture to being called a white kid down in the islands, because I was definitely not the same color palette as everyone else there. Life in Barbados in that time was very interesting. It was a newly independent country from colonial Britain, finding its way newly, but not immediately, but I'm not that old, but certainly a while ago. And they were finding their way forward There were lots of expats there. There were lots of international development agencies there. And I really got the bite for going out and doing things differently in the world. From my immersion into a world where UNICEF, FAO, the WHO, all of those folks were just roaming around. They were doing all of that great development work in the Caribbean at the time. Life was good. I mean, I can't complain. I got to spend a lot of time down there, got a great British education. But then I returned to Canada when I was 16 or so years old. And I went from being the white kid in the neighborhood to the black kid in the school. And it was a very interesting transition. It happened over a 5-hour plane ride and very confusing at the time. It didn't settle well with me, and I went to school out in the West End of Toronto, and there was a whole cultural milieu that was going on there that was very challenging. But for me, you know, when you ask, was there a point in time where something kind of triggered or gave me an opportunity to think differently about where I wanted to place myself, it was that return back to Canada. I struggled a lot in the first couple of years I was back to try and find my way. I would say I probably struggled into my university education because I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I'm still struggling with that today. But I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what my position would be in the world, and not financial position or what my title would be. All that stuff comes as you get on in your day. But it was more about what I was going to do when I wanted to make the impact that I had seen so many others do when I was in Barbados, and the opportunities I had in the Caribbean, how I would then grow into the person I wanted to be. And so for me, it was that return back to Canada as opposed to the time. The time in the Caribbean was the foundation stone. The return back to Canada was the launching point. And so when I got into university, I was the traditional wayward soul, right? I got in there, I found my first pub and then my first class. I got out and did things that, you know, you do when you're free from the shackles of your family. You get out and do stuff, and loved it. It was great. It was that independence that I had been looking for, not really feeling constrained. But at the same time, all those years away in the Caribbean from family here in Canada, I felt very isolated and alone. So I captured that or harnessed that and used that personal experience to try and truly understand how folks feel when they come to Canada. And I spent a lot of time leaving Canada and going to other parts of the world as well, immersing myself in that, what it's like to be alone or new in a country.
Right.
And so my passion in my work has always been around health and social services. But my real passion is about how to create an environment or a culture where individuals, whether they're new to Canada, new to the sector, new to the part of the country that they're in, feel comfortable and confident in what they're doing. And you and I have had the opportunity to travel overseas together to Africa, most recently in the fall. And it stuck with me, you know, in talking to some of the folks there, that they were struck by the passion I had for how you incorporate people into the new life that they're coming to in Canada. Yep, go ahead.
Do you feel that, I mean, you've traveled and lived in many different places throughout your life.
Pretty much.
Can you share a few of those just so
Sure.
folks have context?
Sure. So I was not your typical university student, or maybe I was, but in my undergrad, I was frustrated with being in school still. And so I walked into a travel agent out on Victoria Park in Scarborough. I went to Scarborough campus of U of T at the time, and I walked into a travel agent and I said, I have $2,000, where can you send me? Nice. And she just sort of looked at me and said, well, where do you want to go? And I said, somewhere off the beaten track. And so I ended up on an airplane, and 17 hours later, I was in Hong Kong. Wow. I then took advantage of being in Hong Kong to get on what is now a high-speed train, but was a much slower speed train at the time, up into China, and went out to a very rural part of the country and wandered around. Met with people, had no language facility whatsoever. So, I mean, it was a little daring, and today it'd probably be done a little differently, but certainly at the time it was an opportunity to get out and see. And from that, you bounce into someone in a train station who says, hey, do you want to practice English with me? And you get talking to them, and before you know it, you're on your way to be doing really what became very meaningful work, helping individuals to establish research projects to understand the social determinants of health for rural communities in China, which had pretty much no leg to stand on whatsoever.
What year was this around?
This was in the early 1990s, actually. Okay. I think my first trip to China was in 1990, 1991, and I was working along the border between China and Vietnam on the west side. So a beautiful karst mountains, which are very tall limestone structures, lots of rivers, semi-tropical environment. I mean, you'd wake up and there's, palm trees, and it's Caribbean kid, right? Anywhere where there's a palm tree, I'm a happy guy. So I spent some time roaming around there, and over the course of the next 8 or 10 years, I went back and forth a fair number of times, continuing to do research and work. Also trying to squeeze in some academics at U of T and getting my degrees under my belt.
That must have been, your experience from going from Toronto to Barbados, Toronto, then China. Like, were there certain characteristics that you built or certain skills that you built that helped you go to China and the other countries that you would end up visiting?
I think so. I think one of the main ones was a healthy fear for the world. So healthy being that you don't take for granted that what you have as an opportunity here in Canada from safety and security perspectives exists everywhere you go. And so maybe respect is the right word as opposed to fear, but certainly there was a blend of both. I mean, I was young and I was traveling predominantly on my own.
Can you think of an example of when that really hit you?
I had my visa expire when I was in China once. This is a major no-no. And I was paid a visit by the local constabulary who examined my documents and then proceeded to put me in the back of a truck and drive me down a road, which I did not know where exactly I was being taken. And because of poor language facility skills on my part, I was somewhat concerned. I had my passport, what I had in my pocket, and a backpack that had, a disposable camera and a couple things in it, and that was about it. They were very kind, and they drove me to an office where someone could help me and explain that I needed to leave the country, and they were putting me on the first available way out of the country to go somewhere else. I ended up in Vietnam to get my visa renewed. And so...
Very lucky. I mean, it could
very fortunate. It could have gone very differently. I mean, and I was informed later that options were incarceration, a fairly hefty fine, deportation from the country with a blacklisting, never to return. Wow. I was just very fortunate that someone came along and said, actually, we'll get you where you need to go. Yeah. So I had a couple days of cooling my jets in Hanoi, and then I came back and got on with my day. And then after that, my takeaway from that was never, ever get a 30-day visa to go to China again. Always get a longer one because 30 days go by very quickly. But you realize that. And while I was doing my research in China, I also took advantage of an opportunity that presented itself to go off to Central Africa. I spent time in Rwanda and surrounding countries in the mid-90s when Rwanda was not exactly a most stable place, and did a whole bunch of work there, rehabilitating a pediatric hospital, working on road development projects, spending time with people who were suffering through and on the back end of the trauma associated with the genocide that went on in the country.
That must have been an incredible experience, and I say incredible being positive and of course, traumatic. How has that really framed your understanding of you mentioned we both were in Kenya. I want to get to that in more detail, but how has that framed your role now as the CEO of TCM Homes? As newcomers are coming into your staff, into your environment, and also now some, how do you refer to them? Patients, clients?
Clients, residents.
Residents into the home of different heritage.
So for me, it has given me a very eyes wide open perspective of the world. But more importantly, it has given me the empathy to understand that someone having a bad day when they have recently immigrated to Canada from wherever, it doesn't matter whether things are stable where they've come from or not, is struggling with a whole bunch of emotion and change fatigue, I think is the best way to put it, which is usually bottled up inside. I've experienced it. I experienced it when I would go away to countries, when I returned to Canada from the Caribbean, when I went there as a small child, and there were no psychologists to talk to. There was nobody. You just kind of, in my case, got on your bike and went for a ride. You're 7 years old trying to figure out your way in a world that you don't even know exactly where you are. And all I was told is if you just keep the ocean on the left, eventually you get home because you go all once around the island and your house is right back where you started from. So eventually it goes there, left or right, depending which way you're going, but you get there. But what I do is I try and invest myself personally, but also with my team. We try to spend an inordinate amount of our energy recognizing that what is on the surface is not all that's going on with somebody. And whether it is our residents in care or whether it is the people who are providing that care, we spend a lot of time offering them supports. And supports come in very interesting ways. It can be a potluck that we're having that is not only traditional Canadian food, whatever that may be, onion rings and burgers, I don't know. But it's something different.
Poutine maybe?
Poutine maybe, something like that, right? But it is about creating an environment where inclusion of things like food, music, artwork, these are things that give people comfort and a reason for feeling like they belong. And it is with that we start to break the ice and help people who are functioning quite well, usually in their job, but you can always tell when someone's got something else going on in the background. And a lot of the time it's worry about what's happening with family or something they've seen on the news, political events going on at home. So we try to create a lot of bandwidth to support that. And it's not always easy to do. We all have very full days and full jobs. But if our commitment is to bring people into our care and or into our employment who come from diverse cultures, then the minimum thing that we should be doing in response is recognizing that they're not your traditional Canadian. And I use that term lightly because I don't know what a traditional Canadian is necessarily. I have yet to meet one. I think they come in every way, shape, and form. And I think that's also important to recognize. I work right now in a very small community just outside of Kitchener-Waterloo. Most recently, and I mean timely, I guess as it is, we're having a conversation about Easter coming up in April. And traditionally, historically, in our homes, we provide Easter meals for our residents and things like that. We are, it is the nature of the majority of the individuals in our care that Easter makes sense that way. And so we have, turkey or ham, whatever happens. But with the changing face of the individuals in our care and those providing service, I've asked the provocative question of my team, why is Easter this? Why is it a turkey meal? Why is it that it is something on a Monday or on the Friday? I know what the answer is, because we predominantly move along with the Gregorian calendar and Christian sort of underpinnings of the country. But that doesn't fit the nature of the people who are both working for us as well as the now starting to shift to those in our care. So we're trying to rethink how Easter is going to be. Because I asked the question, like, we're not celebrating Ramadan, or we didn't do anything for Kwanzaa. I mean, how does this work? And so I'm forcing my team out of their comfort zone as well. It's not just rinse and repeat because we've always done it that way. So
that's not easy at all.
It's a very hard push.
And speaking of, out of your comfort zone, we took a trip to Kenya together with wonderful organization called Talent Beyond Boundaries. And our roles there, I was there on an education, from an education perspective. You were there as the CEO of TCM Homes, looking to hire individuals at the refugee camp at Kakuma.
Correct.
Refugee camp. And there are a lot of people that are talking about today the challenges we have in a very important institution, and that's in Canada, and that's the healthcare institutions. But not many people are taking the necessary steps to address that. I think people are trying, and some people don't know what to do. But you took a step to come to Kenya to interview people, to see what was happening. Can you share, first of all, what was your impression about that experience for the audience, but also how we can encourage more organizations, not only in the healthcare sector, but other sectors, to look at, take these types of bold steps?
For me, one of my staff members said to me about the week before we were leaving to go to Kenya, she turned to me and she said, it feels very much like you're going back home. Like your preparation for where you're about to go feels very much like you're preparing to return home. And I said, what I'm doing is I'm actually returning to the roots of who I am. I was always a profound traveler, I guess, either through work and or through life in general. And, life gets in the way, family happens, things like that, and you don't get out on the road. A pandemic comes for 4 years and kind of grounds half the world, that sort of thing. My impressions of going to Kenya, I felt like it was going home, but more importantly than that, I was amazed at the progress that had happened in Africa since I was there almost 20 years earlier, I guess.
Oh, yes,
or maybe
that's right. Yeah.
maybe a little longer than that. Sounding very ancient right now. But I was amazed at the progress that had happened at a country level. I had been to Kenya on my previous trip, and it was not, the Nairobi and the surrounding areas were not what I remembered. And, some of that might be revisionist history and that little bit of, out of Africa kind of feel, but I really don't think that's what it was. Kenya itself has evolved a lot. I mean, everywhere has over the last decades, but certainly the infrastructure, the opportunity, the growth that has happened in the country was quite formidable. We took a beautiful road all the way up to Kakuma. When I was there years ago, that was a dirt track. It would have taken us 5 days to make the trek we made in 5 or 6 hours. So it was quite different. My experience there, the refugee camp was as I remembered it being, but much, much larger. And that was a little...
There was about, what, if I remember, 280,000 when we were there?
Just about, 300,000 or so. When I was there many years ago, that was under 30. Wow. So growth continues to happen. And that speaks to, the instability throughout Africa that we're seeing right now. I was impressed, if that's an appropriate term to use, by the caliber of the education that was available to those healthcare workers who were seeking to leave the country. We both got to go and travel to IRC hospital in the camp. We got to see the pediatric ward. We got to see the general surgery area. We went to the phlebotomy lab and got to see where they do all of that work. And it was impressive to see. I mean, 200 inpatient beds, 100 outpatient beds. I mean, this rivals hospitals. This is much larger than rural and remote hospitals here in Ontario. Tremendous educational opportunity, but most importantly, what I was impressed with was the volume of knowledge that was being shared with folks, the opportunity that exists not to just learn in the classroom, but at the bedside, and to share that back into the community. So that to me was a real eye-opener and a great learning when we were there.
How can we encourage more, or do you think we should be encouraging more healthcare institutions and organizations to look out, or should it be searching more and upskilling more Canadians, or is it a bit of both? What's your opinion?
Well, so I have, as you mentioned, Talent Beyond Boundaries, been working with them for the last year or so. You and I forged a fast friendship, I think, meeting in the fall and being on an airplane 2.5 months later, and off we went into the wilds of refugee camps in Africa. I started working with Talent Beyond Boundaries about a year ago now, just over. I signed up to be a consultant with them here in Canada and continue to support their work. So do I think there's opportunity? Absolutely. I wouldn't be investing my own time and energy into doing things if I didn't think so. I think there's a blend that needs to happen. However, I'm also a realist, and here in Ontario alone, it is anticipated that within the next 5 years or less, we will be short between 30 and 40,000 healthcare workers to support the needs of Ontarians as we know them today. That comes through.
That's a massive number.
It's massive, and the opportunity to train up successfully and deploy people into the healthcare system, singularly here in Ontario or even across Canada, and the rest of Canada has needs as well, but certainly here in Ontario, our ability to train up that many individuals that quickly is pretty limited. I'm not sure that that's doable. So if we take at face value what we understand the gap will be, and it seems like it's a fairly robust analysis that was done to get us there. I mean, it was done by the Financial Accountability Office for the Government of Ontario. Take that as you will, but certainly I would argue that that's probably a very conservative approach. I think there might be a larger number than that, given burnout, fatigue, retirement, demographic shift, things like that in the healthcare system. Ontario and across Canada, arguably, but certainly here in Ontario, we're going to be in a bit of trouble if we don't think differently. So getting out there to find people and encourage people to join Canada, which was built on the immigration model, I think seems to be the right way forward.
Have you tried reaching out to your colleagues in the sector? I know you have.
Yes, I have.
Have there been any wins? Have we encouraged more people to look abroad?
I have spent a substantive amount of time talking to people about my experience before going to Kenya, or since coming back from Kenya. So prior to going away, I had a number of colleagues who said to me, "Go and do it, and then tell me how it works, and then we'll talk." Right. So I did just that. Went away, came back, recovered from jet lag and long days and things like that. Got on with it, and then I started to make those phone calls and spent a lot of time talking to folks about the experience, the educational opportunities, the caliber of the individuals who were there, and how they could meet the needs here. I would say that it's slower than I would like, but I am a high-speed person. It's a little slower than I would like, but it's coming. The major concern that most people have here in Ontario is that this is done by an employer, for an employer, through an employer's resources. And it is not easy for all employers to see the intrinsic value, do the business case, make that transition. For myself as a business leader and CEO of my organization, we did some of the analytics. Is it cheaper to advertise here in Canada? Absolutely. Are we seeing the same return on investment as the investment we made when we went to Kenya? And we've, made job offers to over a dozen people now and are just waiting for them to come into the country. I would argue that our investment in Kenya is probably going to pay off bigger dividends than the investments we've made here. And it sounds very arithmetic and mechanical when I put it that way, but in the end, we're creating opportunity. We're filling a gap that we have here. We're giving another human being on the planet an opportunity for a different life. I wouldn't say necessarily better, but different. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that safety piece I talked about earlier, that not having to look over your shoulder or feel insecure about the world that you're in. Canada's a little more stable than that. And I like the idea of being able, it fills two buckets, right? It takes care of the business end of things, but it also gives you that knowledge that you're doing something for humanity. And to me, there's a huge value in that.
Helping someone out.
Helping someone else.
Yeah. Speaking of helping, having 30,000, I think was the number that you mentioned. Yep. I mean, that's one particular sector or a portion of a sector. There are a lot of challenges in Canadian healthcare. Yes. I think it's interesting that so many people come to Canada for the kind of healthcare system, exactly the healthcare system that we have. But we have a lot of challenges here. Mm-hmm. And especially with the existing staff that's here, that institutions are understaffed. There's more pressure on good people, more mental health pressures, family pressures. How are you handling that yourself? Because as a leader in this sector, it can be very challenging. And how do you support your team members with that?
So we'll go in reverse order. How about that? So on the staffing side and on the team member side, we have come up with some innovative ways to do this. Maybe too strong of a word, but we're certainly making investments to offer staff different opportunities. So we've put wellness support programs in place. They have financial resources associated with them, but there are also links to other opportunities that exist in the community for people to have fun, if you want to call it that, outside of work. It's not just about work. It's not about, I'm going to send you for another educational symposium on dementia care or things like that, wound care in our sector. It's not just about that. It's about how do I support that person? How do I give them the opportunity to be there for their family, feel well inside and stable? We really try to promote, and it's tough to do because I have a lot of type A's who work for me as well, but we really try to support the concept of work-life balance, like put it down and get out of the office, right? I'll give you the tools to work remote, but I really don't want you doing it all the time. And so we really try to reinforce that. Trying to lead by example is not always easy, as I'm sure you're aware. The days are short and the nights are long, as I like to say. But I personally spend a lot of time. I have a personal philosophy around this, and there's a couple hours every day that it's a no-fly zone. It's family time, and there's time in the morning when I spend getting the kids up and doing that like last minute ditch effort on making sure the homework's taken care of, get lunch in the bag, have breakfast, things like that. And I try desperately as often as possible to make sure I drop them off at school, because for me it's only 10 minutes down the road, but it is that quality time where we turn the stereo up too loud, open the windows, and disturb the neighborhood, and that's how we do things. And then in the evenings, desperately, I try to make sure that I'm home for the evening routine. I might not be there for dinner every night, but I certainly make sure I'm around for that evening routine. And, they have come to realize and recognize the value I place on that, and it's valuable to them as well. And we, it's not about quantity of time all the time, it's about quality. And so we make sure that quality is in there, and that, that helps to recharge my batteries. Other than that, I take every advantage I can, which is not often, but I take every advantage I can to get that physical exercise and stuff going. Stop, put the phones down.
Well, I'm glad when we were in Kenya, we got some workouts in at the gym, and so it was nice to. I think you went to the gym a little bit more than I did. But.
Well, it was never a competition, but we definitely made every effort to get there. Yes.
Yeah. And speaking of music, I think when we went to lunch, I had Aladdin, A Whole New World playing, which is a great song, but I think that was from when my kids were in the car.
You blamed your daughter, I think, on that one. But I mean, you look like you could be an Aladdin junkie on that one. So yes, but it's those kinds of things, right? It's finding the quality moments, not just reveling in the notion that you're, like, oh, I'm away again, or I'm not able to do this, or that sort of stuff. I really try and focus on the quality of time we spend together as a family, and that goes for my wife as well. The time that we get to spend together is precious and very important, and we take every advantage of that.
So I don't know, Stephen, if you heard about the third culture kid term before.
Not before meeting you.
Not before meeting me.
Yes.
How has that resonated, if at all, with you? What are your feelings on that concept?
I can see how myself, from a definition perspective, I fit in there fairly well. I can see how I don't in many regards as well. So for me,
I mean, it doesn't have to resonate. You are on the podcast.
I know it doesn't have to. I see exactly how it resonates with me, actually, if I have to be really. No, I see how I fit into that category quite well, actually. And to be honest with you, after we talked and I really dug into this, and I am a researcher by heart, so, you spend your time taking a look at all these things and you dig into it a bit. And it's like, wow, that really does embody, although I didn't understand or recognize the term and how it would apply to me, I actually see how that lines up with my experience very well.
How did it not resonate?
Well, I think that it is that part of me that sits there and says, I was born into a world of very hardworking parents. Like, there's no silver spoon in our family. We still don't own those. But we just don't have those on purpose, I think. But I think when I think about it, I came from a world where I was not struggling for things. I was not trying to figure out where the next meal was going to come from, or if there would be a roof over our head. Like, we didn't have that existence. We lived a life where that was not the concern. There were other concerns, but that certainly wasn't it. And so from that perspective, and recognizing that I, in my very early formative years, spent time in the world where people lived in homes that were clapboard with this tin roof in 38-degree heat, right? Like that's in other parts of the world we use those for punishment, not necessarily for housing. And so it was I didn't see myself in the light of someone who had to really struggle, so to speak, to find their way. And so when you ask, like, why didn't I think it resonated for me? Because I guess I saw myself in a position of more privilege than not. However, privilege comes in a lot of ways, and it's not just about monetary or resource things. And where I see it definitely applying to me is that notion of being immersed in a world where you were not from, and you had to find your way. You had to figure out where you fit, how you belonged, and find a new set of roots. Like, and that was truly, as I've traveled the world, it's always been, how do I fit here, and how do I establish myself as part of the world that I'm in? I'm not just at a 5-star sitting on a beach waiting for a beer. It's about, how do I become part of things? And earlier you were asking me about other places I've traveled. I mean, I've done most of South Central America, on everything from educational opportunities for students to building projects. Bounced around in Africa a fair bit, throughout Asia, spent some time in Europe for work, but, that was a little more 5 stars. It was a business thing. But certainly, regardless of whether there was a platinum card in my pocket or a $5 bill, it was about, how do I make that go as far as I can, not just for me, but those around me as well.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel, I, as you know, was lucky enough to travel quite a bit, from when I was 20 to actually even when I was younger, but at least work-wise from when I was 20 and then came back to Toronto at 33. But there's positives and negatives to that. I mean, I think the negatives can be very lonely, and you can tend to stay in your shell or stay in the hotel or the room that you're in and not engage. And I can definitely say the first 2 years when I was first out there, 20 to 22, I cried almost every night because I didn't know how to connect and really was scared about losing who I was as, this kid from Winnipeg.
Yep.
And it's not only, and I think the pivotal moment for me, or I know the pivotal moment for me, was when I came back to Winnipeg and was excited to meet my buddies who were going to be my best friends for life, and who, unfortunately, and nothing to say to them, but didn't connect with my experiences, and it was really that I had changed, and I think, you had this, as you shared your story, this wonderful action-oriented step to seek out connection as you traveled to these different places, going to a travel agent and asking where I can go for $2,000. So I think that's remarkable. And I think a lot of the skills that you shared have really helped not only you, but those people coming to your organization from different parts of the world. I think it's wonderful, and I'm glad it resonates. And
it absolutely does. I mean, like yourself, it wasn't all sunshine and lollipops out there, right? Like, there were days. I'm an introvert by general characteristic, which most people find very hard to believe. But there's on for work, on for life, on for business, and then there's me, which is perfectly happy with a wrench in my hand and alone in the garage, kind of working on the car or building something in the backyard, or just a book in the basement with no one talking to me. I crave I can be on for 23 and a half hours a day, but if I don't get my 30 minutes to myself, it's a problem. And it's a problem for me. It's not a problem for anyone else. It's just a problem for me. And I know when I'm at the end of that rope, where I just need to go into my room and either have that cry or have that break, or, turn on mindless TV, not even in a language I understand, and just let the lights flicker in front of me just to have that break.
Yeah.
And, lots of travel, many, many, many miles in planes and trains and automobiles and boats as well, but certainly, and even occasionally on a horse. But anyway, that's another story. But certainly out there doing things. And the reality is, I feel better able to capture the moment and be part of the moment with others if I can find that time to myself. So I hear what you're saying, and it doesn't matter how many times I get on an airplane or how many times I travel. I feel it right there every time. right? And it's not like, oh my goodness, I'm getting on a plane, it could go down in the Atlantic and no one will ever find me again. Or I'm going to be like, Tom Cruise and eating coconuts forever. It's not that. It's the
Tom Cruise or Tom Hanks? Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks. Tom Cruise wouldn't live on an island. Tom Hanks for sure, right? Castaway on my own. And now there are times when that feels like it would be good, but it's the 30 minutes of a day, not the rest of it. I really think that for me, there is that anxiety about getting on a plane, and it's not about the travel. It's about when the door opens on the other end and you walk out. Right. It's the opportunity that sits there. It's not a fear, it's an excitement, but there's that hint of fear. And I think that's what keeps me grounded. I'm not so excited that I'm just going to go running out of the jetway and leap headfirst into what's happening. It's the desire to be part of, but the experience to actually take a breath and make sure that you're setting yourself up for success.
So there's a lot of immigrants, of course, that have come to Canada, and now there's the next generation that is born here. What is your advice to that generation in terms of being coming from that immigrant background, career or personal growth? What advice would you have for that generation?
Be true to yourself. I mean, my wife is Punjabi, first generation Canadian. Her parents were both immigrants to Canada. The pressure in the Indian community on this first generation of Canadian kids is intense, right? Got to be an engineer, a doctor, a this or that, very professional lawyers, this sort of thing.
Oh, is there something else?
I think those are the only three, right? Doctor, engineer, lawyer. I think that's the only three. After that, everything else is just a support matrix. Maybe CEO of your own company, maybe. But I mean, you got to work hard to get there. Be a doctor first. And I see that pressure amongst her and her cousins and family members constantly. And my advice is be true to you. So if you're not interested in being a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, don't, because you may fill your family's bucket, but you personally have to live that life. You have to be that person. So if you're interested in being an artist or you want to go and be a carpenter or something, I mean, there's that opportunity too. It's hard. I get it, because you're going against, familial pressure and societal expectations within the community and stuff like that. But if it is something that will satisfy you, because in the end, you have to be happy in your world too, lead with that. And your family, and I see this with my wife and her family as well, her mom, supportive of who she wants to be, supportive of what she wants to achieve herself, not as a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, but as an occupational therapist.
Right.
And just fabulous at what she does, committed, engaged, and fulfilled. And I think that's the important part. So there's a lot of pressure out there, but eyes wide open at who you want to be and what you can be as a person, not skill set or anything, what you can be as a human. And then don't lose that. Don't lose who you are. Don't lose your culture, because it's easy to just become, washed out, so to speak, and you lose who you are as a societal background, as a cultural background. Don't lose that either, but be your own self. And I think you start down the road of being a much happier person.
There's a lot of things that people can be critical about in Canada's healthcare system and institutions. I don't mean to challenge you, but maybe this is a challenge. What are the positive things that you see in the Canadian healthcare system?
It's usually the shorter list, isn't it?
I don't think that was on the list of
it
questions.
Wasn't on the
so
list
I just
at all.
To
No, you're throwing me that proverbial curveball in the seventh inning here.
There's a lot of people that come to Canada with that hope.
Yeah.
I'll share a quick story.
Sure.
There was our company sponsored the Parasports Games in Durham Region.
Okay.
And we had our teachers and staff members come, and we were watching blind soccer, which in itself is absolutely incredible.
That sounds astounding. Okay. Yeah.
Amazing to watch, and amazing that there's a sport like that, and many others. But we were kind of sponsoring this event, so all of our team members were there to cheer on the teams. And there was a gentleman there from one of our instructors from Africa, and from Eritrea specifically. And he was mentioning that when he grew up, I don't know the situation now, but he said, this is absolutely incredible what we're seeing. And I said, yeah, it's, how are they playing? Like, how did they make up these rules, et cetera? He said, no, in my country, if there was someone who was blind, they would kind of be shunned out of society. Yeah. We would never forget about participating in society. We would never be cheering for them in this kind of parasports games. And I thought that was absolutely incredible, and also opened my eyes to the privilege and opportunities we have here in Canada. And also, that we do have a lot of criticisms about things that are not working here, or things that need to be improved. But it can be a reminder that there are some very positive things, especially in other parts of the world, that they don't have.
The Canadian healthcare system gets beat up a lot. There are a lot of folks out there who, and I mean, you don't have to look too far, just even south of the border, how is it affordable? How do you guarantee access, things like that? And there are challenges with all that, but arguably there are everywhere. I mean, we're working in an environment where we're short on people who are qualified to deliver care, and the demands for care are going up. So, it's a terrible formula, but it is the one we have. Great things about the Canadian healthcare system, despite what people believe, we're very innovative. We lead the charge on robotics. We are part of, penicillin was discovered here. There's a whole bunch of things that are really positive about the Canadian healthcare system over the years.
I didn't know the innovation part.
We are actually quite innovative. So as part of my professional journey, I spent time, if that's what it's called. I think it's a journey. It's not a quest. It's a journey. I spent time out at the University of Saskatchewan working in the College of Medicine out there, and we had a research physician there who was leading the way with robotics in care. So telemedicine to remote communities with robots on the far end, where you couldn't get a doctor to go there, or it was impossible to be there on a regular basis. And so the robotics were placed in the clinics, and he was working on the mechanics of how you do this, and part of the process of changing legislative requirements and policy procedure to make this happen, where a nurse on the other end was working in collaboration with this doctor, much like they would if this was an operating table between us. They would be working collaboratively here, but now they're separated by a few thousand kilometers. And, a Cat6 cable and a robot on the other end, and they were able to do things together. So, I mean, we lead the charge on that. But from a healthcare system perspective, we think creatively about what we do. There are always going to be criticisms, and it does not matter what it is. You shouldn't invest in this. We need more primary care in the community, less acute care in the hospital, unless you actually need the hospital, in which case you want more. Long-term care is understructured, understaffed, under-budgeted, but we have a very large and robust long-term care system here. I don't think there's a problem with the healthcare system. I think the real issue that we have is society's expectation on what the healthcare system is supposed to be.
Interesting.
So when you take a look at the Northern European countries, for example, the emphasis there is on wellness. Here, we're very much a curative society. We wait till we get sick, then we present at the emerge department, we gripe about being there, but then we seek someone to make us better. When you take a look at Finland, Norway, places like that, and deeper south into Europe, certainly, the investment is around how do I stay well? It's about getting out and walking more, biking more, finding time for oneself. Germany and some of the surrounding countries in the EU were the first place in the world where they implemented mandatory legislation that forbid employers from contacting their employees outside of regular working hours on their electronic devices.
Right.
Just not allowed. No email, no phone calls. Like at 5 o'clock when you check out, you've checked out, because there's the work-life balance piece that was out of necessity, I think, enshrined in legislation, but it became a cultural expectation. And so I think here, as Canadians, as citizens of this country, we need to invest ourselves better in ourselves up front. The healthcare system can be there for everybody when they need it, but we're not doing what we need to do, the preventative maintenance side of things, to ensure that system doesn't need to be sitting there for us. And so when the wait lists are long and you take a look at why, and I've had the privilege of looking at some of this information over the years, primary care is a perfect example. When you look at the lengthy waits you have to go in and see your family doctor, for example. 5-10 years ago, I looked at this data, and one of the reasons the waits were so long was we didn't have social programs in place for individuals, particularly seniors, but not just seniors, individuals who were lonely in the community, who didn't have a social network around them, to access care, to access support. So they went to their doctors because, you show your little card and in you go and talk to the doctor about, I got this pain over here. Did you see the Blue Jays play last night? Like, you do that sort of thing.
Right.
And so by recognizing that, a shift was made to invest into more social programming to try and draw people out of the family doctor's office and into other places. It hasn't been perfect. It still needs more work. But the notion and the NHS in the UK has created a ministry of loneliness. It's a horrible statement, but they have a ministry within the government structure that is dedicated to finding a way to support people who are suffering with loneliness. And if you follow modern day thinking, the Blue Zone sort of things that are on Netflix, my wife, I love her to pieces, made me watch all of these with her. But when it comes down to it, there was a lot of really interesting information that came out of there, because countries that are succeeding in keeping their cost per capita down on healthcare, having better outcomes around individuals' suicide prevention, anxiety, depression disorder, things like that, it's coming from environments where we embrace all people in the community, despite age. We recognize the value they bring to the community, and we revel in that. We bring them to the table as part of the conversation. We don't do that well here. And so if we want to see the healthcare system thrive, you can keep pouring money into it. It's like throwing water into the ocean. I've thrown water into the ocean for many years. I have not seen it rise because of it. We're never going to get on top of this. We have to change our way of thinking a little bit. And the healthcare system, general structures can absolutely support the needs of Canadians, even in our current state. But we need some other pieces around the system. And then we need to do the hardest of hard things, is we need to implement a change management strategy with people's expectations.
Right.
That's the hardest of hard, right? The Canada Health Act's been in place, and like OHIP in Ontario has been in place since the 60s. You're talking about changing 60 going on 70 years worth of thinking. That's going to be hard.
That is going to be hard, and it's a challenge, and it's really amazing to have someone like you in a leadership role in the healthcare sector taking on that challenge. There's been a lot of challenges as you've shared in your life, and having someone taking that charge, especially on a very important sector of Canada, and I think in any country, is incredible. So thank you for doing that.
Absolutely.
And thank you for coming on the podcast, my friend.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to coming back again.
Yes, please.
We'll talk about something more provocative someday. How about that? Something like more politically challenged.
Yes.
Let's not do that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.